Hello and welcome to another off-the-shelf board game review. This week we're going to look at Core Worlds. It's a game from 2011, making it a little bit older. So in this review we're actually going to go ahead and look at the expansion and include that in the total review for the total package. Core Worlds is a deck-building futuristic science fiction game of intergalactic conquest for 2 to 5 players, ages 10 and up. Playtimes can range anywhere from 1 hour to 2 hours depending on how many players you have. This is definitely one of those games that when you get a 5-player count, it's really going to head towards that further end of the playtime scale. But a good 2-player count game could probably get done in probably about 45 minutes, maybe an hour tops. Core Worlds is a game of intergalactic conquest played over 10 rounds where the players are trying to get to the most powerful, or the core worlds for which the game is named after, and score the highest amount of points. Whoever has the most points in the game is the winner. In the beginning of the game, each player is going to get their own home world, which is a barbaric world, not quite as advanced as the core worlds, but they've gone to war and they're going to go towards the center of the core worlds and take over the entire empire. Each player also gets their own deck of 16 cards. Now this deck of cards has one unique card that is unique to every race's or every home planet or barbaric world's faction. Additionally, at the beginning of the game there's also going to be an early draft where players can remove 2 cards from their deck, add in 2 other cards that they're going to draft at the beginning to their deck to make it a little more asymmetrical every time you play Core Worlds. Every player is going to get a player board, which is going to be used to track how many actions they get their turn, and how many actions you get is going to be based on what round of the game you're playing. In the first couple rounds you get 4 actions, all the way to the final round you're actually going to get 6 actions per turn. Additionally, your player board also tracks your energy. You gain energy by conquering worlds, and as you move further away from the barbaric worlds and more into the core worlds, or where the Galactic Empire is, the worlds become harder to conquer, but they become much more energy rich. You're going to use the energy these planets produce in your war zone to get more air units to fight your space battles, or more ground units to fight your ground fights. And additionally, you can also get tactic cards, which are actually kept in your hand, which is a little bit different from the main game, because in Core Worlds, one of the very cool things about Core Worlds is you play all your cards from a tableau, so all the other players can see just what your armada and your army is made up of. But the tactic cards add a little bit of sneakiness because no other player knows just what kind of tactic cards you happen to have in your hand. As the rounds go on, players are going to slowly draft cards from the outer barbaric worlds first, moving in towards the closer where the core worlds are for the more powerful cards, including more powerful units, more energy rich planets, and even event cards that can be random boons or negatives. The early event cards are always positives, but as you move towards the core worlds, these event cards get more challenging, more difficult, and all around make everything a little bit more exciting for all the players. Of course, the main objective of the game is to make it all the way to the center of the galaxy and start conquering the core worlds, which are actually worth the most points and also give you the best resources. The expansion to the game, Galactic Orders, adds 2 really cool things to the game. It adds event cards, which are randomizers that come out randomly through the game. Sometimes they'll come out, sometimes they won't. There's approximately 6 of them in every one of these decks, and they may or may not come out just depending on the luck of the shuffle and the luck of the draw. Additionally, the Core Worlds expansion adds in 6 factions that the players can vie for favor with that are giving them their extra special abilities, such as extra energy, the ability to have more powerful effects in combat, and other special abilities just to make the game a little more interesting. Can you lead your barbaric civilization from the outer rims all the way to the core worlds, bring on galactic conquest, have the highest score, and win favor of the empire? That is Core Worlds, the card game. The basic Core Worlds game retails for $45, and for that $45 you get approximately 200 cards, plus the player mats and some cardboard tokens. The expansion Galactic Orders is going to add in the faction boards, some more tokens for you. It's going to add in almost 100 extra cards, and it's going to retail for $35. Although to be honest and perfectly fair, you can usually find the regular game, the base game, and the expansion. I found it on Amazon. I actually got both of them together when I purchased this game about a year ago for just shy of $60, which is actually a great deal for the entire package, base game and expansion, with all the components you get. Now the base game itself has some okay quality components, and if it was any other company behind Stronghold Games, I would actually say the components are above okay, but I've seen what Stephen Bonnecore can do, especially with games such as Confusion with its extremely large plastic components that are gigantic that comes with this game. Or Survive, which comes with a very nice wooden meeples for all the pieces, including the survivors, the dolphins, and everything like that. So when I say what I'm about to say, take it knowing that I have seen some fantastic quality components come from Stronghold Games. So fair or not, I'm going to be a little bit harder on their component quality because I have seen what they've done. Now my only gripes with this game, and before I get on with the gripes about the quality of the components, I have to say the card stock for these cards is very good. They have a good snap to them. They're going to last a long time. I've had this game literally for over a year now. I've had it ever since the expansion came out. I bought it as the entire package because I'd played the game before that and I knew I wanted it as soon as I played it. The game has a lot of great artwork, and the artwork just only improved with the expansion, where the artwork was even better, brought out a lot of nice stuff. Some really good quality artwork that came with this game. So my complaints are not with the artwork, it's not with the card stock, it's just with the components that do come with the game. And that starts with the player boards. The player boards are made of just standard card stock. It's not thick cardboard, and you actually, when you get the expansion and you get these faction boards, you actually see that these are thick, really hard cardboard, but the basic game just comes with card stock, which isn't bad. And again, I'm trying to be fair and trying to be honest. If this was any game besides Stronghold Games, I would say these are decent, good quality components, but just knowing what I've seen from Stronghold Games, I would have liked to have seen these be just a little bit better. Additionally, the turn cards are actually just plain little cards, nothing extra special, no card stock or anything like that for those. Additionally, when the expansion came out, it comes with an extra core world. And instead of getting new player boards that came with the expansion, there's actually just a spot there where I guess we're supposed to just glue these cardboard tokens onto these player boards. Now again, I think I'm being unfair here, but maybe it's just perception or anything like that. I would have to say, just looking at all the great stuff I've gotten from Stronghold Games, I have to be honest here, I was just a little bit disappointed with those components. Especially if you just consider the basic retail price of the game, not looking at discounts by ordering through online retailers. The basic retail price of $45 with less than 200 cards. Now granted, they all have a lot of good artwork on them, a lot of unique artwork that matches the theme, and it looks really fantastic. It's just hard to look past those two minor quibbles I have with the player boards and the turnaround markers. I thought they could have done a little bit better there. The components for the cardboard card stock is actually really good for the tokens, for the faction tokens, and even the base set cardboard tokens are good quality. Although I have to admit, I think they could have included a couple of these extra energy tokens. In a 5-player game, it can occasionally happen where you're not going to have enough of these. And when you actually watch my video that explains how to play the game and I show you the sample game, you actually see how that can happen when you get certain cards that require these energy tokens to track certain things that are going to happen to some of your special heroes. And in addition, you're going to need these tokens to track cards that are left out on the table from prior rounds draft. There is oftentimes during a 5-player game where you're just not going to have enough of these tokens. Another slight knock against that. I know I may be being a little bit overly harsh here because this game, on the positive, has some fantastic artwork. You look at the artwork for the spaceships, they look very thematic, they look fantastic. There's ground assault troops, and the artwork here again is just awesome. It really brings out the theme of the game. Just looks fantastic, really well drawn, full color artwork. A lot of the artwork is unique. Not a lot of the art is recycled, except for the planets. A lot of the planets look the same, but you know, they're planets, what do you expect there? But there's unique artwork for the spaceships, the capital ships, the fighter ships, the ground units, the tanks, the missile launchers. Everything has its own unique artwork, which is absolutely fantastic. The card stock for the cards is good. They're going to last a long time. They're not flimsy or cheap cards at all, and I definitely have to give kudos for that. The cardboard is good. My only complaints, again, is just the fact that the player boards, I thought they could have been made out of cardstock. I think the turnaround markers should have been made out of cardstock again. And I think with the expansion, instead of just adding these little tokens we were supposed to glue to our player boards, I think they should have just given us new player boards. They already gave us thick cardstock with the expansion. I think they could have done that. Otherwise than that, very good quality, good value for your money. Definitely pretty good here. As a father of two young board gamers, it's always very important for me every time I do a review to take a few minutes and discuss the suggested age for a board game, or in this case, a card game. Now, every game we know has a suggested age on it, but not all the time are those ages accurate, or sometimes doesn't always make sense. Now, Core Worlds lists as a game for ages 10 and up and plays 2 to 5 players in about an hour to 2 hours. Now, this game can be extremely complex, whether you're talking about the strategies or just the mathematics that can be involved in the game. Now, granted, the mathematics were just basic addition and subtraction, but the trick for the game is you have to monitor two different mathematical totals, especially with some of the more difficult planets that have a strength for ground and a strength for air assault, so you have to look at both mathematics of that. You get the mathematics of tactic cards, which can be thrown in from there also. Plus, there's going to be a lot of cards that have temporary bonuses. I don't want to use the term random bonuses because that's not quite what they are, but they're definitely temporary bonuses, or bonuses that are circumstantial would probably be the best way to describe it, such as some cards will say if you have this card in play, it's going to be a 2 air, 2 ground strength, but if you have a robot in play, you're going to have +1/+1 for every additional robot you're going to have in play. So the math in the game isn't really challenging. It's basic addition and subtraction. The problem is you're going to get your math from a lot of directions, and there is a lot in this game that you got to pay attention to. Now, for your average adult, it's not going to be too complex, but for your younger children, trying to keep track of all these things, plus trying to juggle tactics and strategies, plus trying to make a long-term plan, because the first couple times you play Core Worlds, you're not going to pick up on this, but the basic strategy you're going to want to do, and again, this is going to fluctuate depending on how many players you have playing, is you're basically going to want to look at the first draft that comes out for the very beginning of the game, couple that with the pre-game draft of the cards you add to your hand, and then start planning early on in the game for which Core Worlds you're going to go after towards the end of the game. That's basically how your strategy is going to go. Of course, this is a game where you have to have a very malleable strategy. You have to be ready for some cards never to come out, and that'll happen a lot in smaller player count games, especially a 2 or 3 player game, where you're going to have about, I'm going to say on average, maybe about 18 to 24 cards come out tops in a 3 player game out of a deck that can have up to 36 cards. What that means is not all cards are always going to be available every single game, so you're going to have to be able to adjust your strategy on the fly and modify your strategy, which is again something that's going to be a lot more challenging for younger players. So the game can be complex, which is something I really like about Core Worlds, but it's definitely something you're going to want to consider if you're thinking about playing this with younger players. The game does say ages 10 and up, and I actually think this is one of those rare instances where that may be a little bit of a low number. I think that somebody's probably going to be age 12 or up is going to be the right age to be able to get good strategies, to be able to future plan or do the future plan this game requires, and also be a competent player of this game. I think a 10-year-old could play this game and probably could enjoy the game, but I don't think they're going to be able to grasp the deeper strategies of the game. They're going to occasionally mess up on the mathematics, especially with the combinations between the units who get more powerful when you have different units on the board, such as robots seem to work really well together. So if you want to go for a robot strategy or in the game where you can go after the robot units which are going to work together and become more powerful together, which is also going to have to affect your eventual strategy for the core world you're going to go after, and also for the kind of cards that are going to help your score the most. Additionally, this game does play 2 to 5 players, which would make it a good family game because it has a higher 5-player player count. The disadvantage of that is, though, this game can take a long time. Most of your card games are not long. Most of your card games are usually an hour or less. This is one of those games that when you play with 5 players, you can easily expect this game to take up to 2 hours easily, even by players who are really good at this game. Now, it's not going to happen all the time, and if you get some players who just, can avoid the analysis paralysis, that's not going to happen too many times. But it definitely can happen, especially the first couple times you play this game. It is very common in this game in the 9th and the 10th round when the players are really trying to math out their final moves to get the highest score they can get. You're going to see this game slow down to a crawl in the 9th and 10th round, and that's something that younger kids are not going to be able to appreciate. They're going to start getting antsy. They're going to start wanting the game to start advance, and they're not going to have the patience for how long this game can take, especially with a 4 or 5 player count. Now, speaking of player count, I'm going to kind of go against the grain with this game. I know a lot of people say that Core Worlds is best as a 3 or 4-player game, and they will not suggest playing this with 5 players. I'm actually kind of on the opposite spectrum for this game. I think that Core Worlds is actually best with 4 or 5 players because that gives you the most cards that are going to come out from the decks, out of your galactic decks. Now, this game, in a 2-player game, you're mostly going to get out of these, each one of these galactic decks has over 30 cards, and the most amount of cards you're going to get out of these decks is probably 15, maybe 18 tops is the most you're going to see out of each one of these galactic decks. And the reason for that is in a 2-player game, you're basically going to have 6 cards to draw out of your central zone. Of course, they may vary a little bit depending if you get a bad draw on worlds or you get a bad draw on non-world cards. But even in a worst case scenario, I can't imagine anybody ever getting more than 15 to 18 cards out of each one of the galactic decks. Now, considering there's over 30 cards in each one of the galactic decks, that means you're not going to see all the cards out of each galactic deck, which adds a little bit more randomness to the game because, like I said, for me, my strategy when I play this game is I will basically sit down, look at my starting hand, look at what I've drafted, and decide which one of the core worlds is going to be my eventual strategy. They all have different abilities that you need to have, different statistics to get these. Some of them have really good ground strength, some of them are balanced, some of them have really good air strength, depending on how hard they are to conquer. So in this game, you always have to have a long-term goal of trying to figure out which core worlds you're going to eventually be going for. And the randomness of the draw deck means that the cards you may need to come up may never ever come up. It is potentially possible for you to start the game with your plan of going after one of these core worlds that has a very strong ground. So perhaps you want to go for Wotan. It requires you to have at least 14 ground strength to go after it, but it doesn't have very good air defense. It has 0 air defense. Now, if a lot of these cards, as you see from this draw right here, we have cards that are really good at air, mediocre at ground, and if you get a whole bunch of these cards, if Wotan comes up, you're not going to be able to conquer it because nobody's going to have the strength to do it. Whereas opposed to a 4 or 5 player game, it's actually really easy to start seeing almost all these galactic decks nearly be emptied. So you have a really good chance of making sure that all the cards you want for your strategy are going to come out. Now, I will admit a 4 or 5 player game of this game can seem to drag on, which would be the negative of it, especially in the 9th and 10th round when everybody's just agonizing over their last card play. You will see players sit there for 5 minutes and start mathing out their turn, playing it down to the minutest detail, and that can make the game kind of drag. Of course, that will get a lot better as the players get better at the game and they start knowing their strategies and they know exactly how they want to play the game. And also, additionally, one thing I like is with the expansion, when you get these factions out here, they're going to actually help the players with their strategies because they're not going to get stuck quite as easily thanks to the extra abilities that each one of these factions get. In my opinion, the perfect sweet spot for Core Worlds is as a 4-player game. As a 2-player game, it's still fun, but my only contention is that as a 2-player game, it's a little bit too random for me. And in a 2-player game, I actually don't play with the faction cards because they add a little bit too much extra randomness to the game that you have to fight. On the other end of the spectrum, though, the game can run a little bit long as a 5-player game, but I still contend that this is the best way to play the game is as a 4 or 5-player game, especially if you don't have a problem with the game's length. Overall, Core Worlds is good with any player count from 2 to 5. Its sweet spot is going to be a 4-player game, and I think the best starting age for the game is going to be 12 and up. Core Worlds for me is kind of an interesting review for me to do. First of all, my first exposure to Core Worlds was with the expansion, so it was really impossible for me to try to review Core Worlds without throwing the expansion in. I can't just conveniently forget what I already know about a game in an effort to try to review it without some of its parts. Now, I have played Core Worlds more than enough times to tell you that the basic game is good, but it's kind of like steak and lobster. Yeah, steak is okay by itself, but if you add lobster, you add an awesome meal. And that's basically what the expansion is. It's just adding more awesome onto an already really good game. And if there's any vegetarians out there, I'll use the analogy of peanut butter and chocolate, so you get the point. Basically, Core World's the base game. It's a good, great game, but as soon as you add the expansion, everything adds in, it takes a good game and just makes it absolutely fantastic, makes it awesome. Just to take a few moments and talk about what the expansion adds. The expansion adds event cards. Now, event cards are really, really cool. They're a little bit of a randomizer, but I like how they work. The event cards in the first couple Galactic decks are actually boons and benefits for all the players, helping the game get started earlier so you don't get that long drag that can occasionally happen in early stages of the game if you don't get a good selection of worlds, units, and tactics in the draft pile. And as you go on through the further Galactic decks, the event cards actually get more challenging and become more negative, and some of them can actually be very interesting and modify the game in really interesting ways. And the more you play the game and the more you know about these event cards, the more you plan for them. The unfortunate thing is the first couple times you play the game and you don't know what some of the later event cards do, you can feel like they're being a little bit unfair to you, because some of them are meant to tackle certain play styles and kind of just smack those play styles around and say, probably not the best strategy to use. So the first couple times you play the game, I would probably suggest not using those event cards, at least until you're familiar with the game enough to understand good strategies and good tactics for the game. Or actually, I might even suggest just using the event cards from the first 2 Galactic decks to help the game get started to an early start so you don't get a slower start in the beginning, and then remove the event cards from the 4th and the 5th Galactic deck where you can start getting the negatives from it. Additionally, I really like the factions that come with the game. Now, the factions were already existed in the base game, but the icons were just on the cards. You have no idea what they were for. And basically what these do is every time you play a card that has a matching faction on it, you're basically going to add one of your faction tokens onto that thing that lets you know that you can use that ability once per turn, rather once per game, and you spend that faction. But of course you can get more faction tokens on to use that ability at future times. Additionally, if you don't use these faction abilities, they're actually worth victory points in the game, which is kind of an interesting balancing act. Do you use these points or these abilities to help you out when you're kind of in a bind, or if you're sailing through and doing really good with your strategy, you keep them on the cards to get extra victory points at the end of the game. Kind of a nice touch. Also, the expansion cleans up some of the text on a couple of cards which had some wording that could have been taken one of 2 different ways. And the expansion, it just adds some more cool cards, more units, more worlds, just more cool abilities that just really make the game a lot more fun. I'm at the point where I would say I will not play Core Worlds without the expansion. I think the expansion just makes the game complete. The other interesting thing about reviewing Core Worlds is the fact that Core Worlds is part of a trio of different games made by different companies and different designers that are basically lumped together in the same genre almost. You have Eminent Domain, you have Race for the Galaxy, and you have Core Worlds. They're all basically Galactic Conquest card games, all play slightly differently. And I'm not afraid to admit that I am a Race for the Galaxy fan. I hate to use the term, but Race for the Galaxy is one of my all-time favorite card games, especially when you're talking about space, empire, conquest type of card games. Now, if I was to do a big smackdown between Eminent Domain, Core Worlds, and Race for the Galaxy, I can actually answer that pretty darn quickly. I own Core Worlds. It'll stay in my collection until I'm pushing up daisies. I own Race for the Galaxy. It'll also stay in my collection until I'm pushing up daisies. I don't own Eminent Domain. Of course, I should add in the fact that I haven't played Eminent Domain with the expansion, which I've heard actually corrects some of the issues with the game that I personally had, but haven't given it a chance. But at this point, in my opinion, Core Worlds and Race for the Galaxy are the 2 best games in their genre for their style of game. I think Race for the Galaxy is the best as a 2-player game in this style of game, and I think Core Worlds is the best as a 4-player game in this style of game. So if I had to choose between Race for the Galaxy and Core Worlds, and somebody had to say which game do I like better, I'm going to ask how many players are we talking about. If we're talking a 2-player game, I'm going to pick Race for the Galaxy every single time. If we're talking a 4-player game, I'm going to pick Core Worlds every single time. Now, to talk a little bit more about Core Worlds, the game itself, I think Core Worlds does a fantastic job with the theme. I actually think in a way that it does a better job than Race for the Galaxy. And I'm not going to sit here and do constant comparisons between this game and Race for the Galaxy. This isn't that kind of review, but I would be remiss if I didn't at least mention it so you understand where I'm coming from with this review. Now, one of the really cool things I like about Core Worlds is the open war zone. Now, every player has their own war zone where all their cards, including their core worlds, just their playing worlds, I use the term core worlds, I apologize, but all their worlds and all their spaceships are all in their war zone. Their tactic cards are always held in their hand. So the really cool thing about this is when you're looking at the available draft of cards, there's kind of a really cool bluffing element to the game. For example, if this planet is in the draw for the central zone, you can obviously look at the other player's war zone and see what kind of units they have available in their war zone and see if they'd even have the potential, even have a chance at taking out this planet. Now, I like that, and when you throw in the fact that you get the tactics cards, it adds in a little bit of randomness, and I should say more of a surprise tactics to the game, because you may know what your opponent has in the war zone, but you have no idea what tactic cards they have in their hand. So there's kind of a nice little balancing act, almost a bluffing aspect to the game, where you want to keep out just enough units to barely or come close to taking on the worlds you want without throwing your game and letting other players know exactly what worlds you're going to. That's where the tactic cards come in. You can have just shy of just enough points. For example, if you only had this ship out right here with a strength of 6, and let's say you had this capital ship in your war zone, and you had these 2 infantry in your war zone, for example, and let's say this is one of the cards available in the draw. Now, if the other players looked at your war zone, they would think that you couldn't get this planet, so they don't have to panic or worry that they have to start fighting for this planet. But what they don't know is that you may have tactic cards in your hand that are going to allow you to be powerful enough to take out this world. So I have a 6-2 right here, which is not enough to take out the 7-3. But if I play this tactic card and this tactic card, and if there was the event out that allows me to actually play this tactic card, because in this example, probably not the best example, I couldn't actually play this tactics card, but just work with me here. If I played these 2 tactic cards, I would definitely have enough air strength and enough ground strength to take out this world, which again adds a nice bluffing element to the game. And that's something I definitely like about the game, because there's kind of a hidden element to the game where your other players don't quite know what you can do, or maybe they do, or maybe you just hold a couple cards in your hand and just have that little look on your face, so they think you can, or they think you can't. It's all part of the bluffing game, and it may force an opponent to show their hand a little bit early. It's another aspect of this game I really do like. Now, speaking of the ground and air units, that's another thing thematically that I really like about this game. Now, of course, you can draw it down to its basic components and just say it's a different kind of purchasing power, but thematically it really works. You have air strength, which is the purchasing power for air, and you have your ground strength, which just really adds to the theme of the game. It makes it feel like you're actually going to war on a galactic scale. You're coming in and attacking the planet with your air units, attacking their outer defenses and their satellites and everything like that. And then if the planet has really weak ground defense, you're throwing in your ground units to finish out the planet, for example. And additionally, after this, the game does have the ability to fine-tune your deck, because with the advanced rules through the expansion, you can actually garrison a conquered world with any unit that you use in that battle. Now, in the basic core world rules, you can only do that with infantry and with your basic starships, but with the advanced rules that come with the expansion, you can actually garrison the planet with any card used to attack that planet, which is going to actually help you fine-tune your deck and get rid of the weak cards so you can get a really lean and efficient fighting force deck. I also really like the factions that come with the game with the expansion, for the simple fact they can really influence how your drafts go. Now, maybe you don't need any robots in your deck because it's not part of your strategy, but you maybe want to get a robot in your deck if you see that it's aligned with a certain faction. That may be a faction that's going to help you with your later strategies in the game. For example, if you get this card into play, he's going to give you 1 token on the Order of Knighthood, which is going to allow you once per use of this token to make your fleets more powerful for a one-time shot. Now, that's something you have to consider when you're playing the game, and I really like that aspect. I also like how Core Worlds has some built-in rules to help minimize some of the poor things or the negative things that can happen with these kind of games. For example, in Core Worlds, when you have your draft, you always have to have a minimum amount of worlds and a minimum amount of non-world cards in every single draft, every single turn. If you don't have that many cards, you're going to keep drawing cards until you have that minimum amount in your draw, in your central purchasing zone, which I think is really awesome. It makes it so that you don't ever have turns where you get, I hate to use the term, but bad cards aren't going to help anybody. It's a really cool rule. Additionally, the game also has these energy tokens which are going to be passed out at certain player counts to help balance out the game, because the game is only played for 10 rounds, and you want to make sure that everybody has an equal footing, so they add in these extra tokens that it gives one-time use extra energy for players in a 3 or 4 player game. Nice touch that helps balance out the game for all player counts. Now, this game can be very deep and very challenging, especially for new players learn, because there is a lot of stuff going on, especially when you throw in the expansion. And it's very easy for new players to feel like they're kind of floundering and not really knowing what strategy they're going to be going for. And they're going to be looking at their turns turn by turn versus planning future turns and planning in advance and planning for those core worlds that are eventually going to come out into the game. And this game definitely rewards player skill. This is one of those games like Race for the Galaxy where a very good player is going to absolutely trounce a new player. and I think that's a good thing, but it's also going to make new players feel a little bit intimidated by the game, because the first time out of the game, they're pretty much going to get destroyed, and that may cause them to have a negative opinion of the game. My suggestion, the first couple times you play with new players, go easy on them, because it really is easy to trounce new players at this game. Before you get good at this game, you're going to need to learn how to plan ahead with your moves. You're going to have to start getting card familiarity. You're going to have to start understanding the tactics and the strategies to get those future core worlds out into the game. You're going to need knowledge about the worlds, which worlds are going to be coming out which round, so you need to balance how much you want to be working towards your air power, how much you want to be working towards your ground power, when tactic cards are going to be good to be put in your hand, when they're not, which player counts are going to be best for what strategies. These are all things that are going to come with time and knowledge and just overall experience with the game. And there are a couple of negatives to this game. The first negative I'd have to lay out the game is the fact that the components aren't quite up to Stronghold Games quality. Now, again, I'm not afraid to admit that I've been spoiled by the games that Stronghold Games has put out. They put out some really fantastic games quality component-wise. You look inside a quality, or you look inside the box of a Stronghold Games, as soon as you open that box, the quality is just there. And now this game is good. The artwork is fantastic, but there's already the points I already mentioned where I thought they could have improved the quality of the components for the game, including the fact that there weren't enough energy tokens with the game. These could have been a little bit better card stock. I would have preferred them to be on cardboard like this. Honestly though, the only real negative I come up with this game is the fact that the game can play long with 5 players, especially in the 9th and 10th turn. If you play with anybody who suffers from analysis paralysis of any level, those last 2 turns can really, really drag on, especially with new players. Of course, it's going to get better with the more plays you have, and as you get more experience with the game, and it's also going to fluctuate depending on how many players you play. In a 2-player game, you're not going to notice that analysis paralysis too badly, but in a 5-player game where every player is looking at every single other player's war zone, mentally calculating which core worlds they have the potential to go for, trying to figure out how they can get those core worlds before the other players, especially if they need them for their strategy, and how to get the most efficient card use in a 4 or 5-player game, it's just going to bog down. I personally don't mind because I enjoy the overall experience for the game, but I understand that that can be a bother for some players, how the game can slow down those final 2 rounds. If you can get over that fact of the final 2 rounds slowing down for this game, I can wholeheartedly suggest Core Worlds to any player. If you're looking for a deck building game with asymmetrical powers, a fantastic theme that really matches the gameplay really well, and involves the deck building, deck drafting genre, and moves it forward to create a very enjoyable, very challenging, very deep strategic game, which is nice to look at, nice to play, and offer an absolutely phenomenal amount of replayability due to the fact that the game is different every time you play it. Each player's deck is going to be different every time they play it due to the draft. The game is going to play out differently depending on what kind of cards are going to come out of the Galactic Draw decks. The game is going to be different depending on what kind of core worlds are going to come out at the end. The game is going to be different depending on what kind of events are going to pop up. It's different enough each time you play it, but not to the point that it feels too random or just too chaotic to play. If this is a game that sounds interesting to you, check out Core Worlds. This has been another off-the-shelf board game review. Thanks for watching.